So, hi and welcome to our fourth Protected Reflections event. Student Financial Wellbeing, Good Practice in Enabling Student Financial Resilience and Dealing with Gambling Issues. Thank you for taking time out to join us today. We'll be running a live Q&A with our speakers at the end of the session. So we've enabled the Q&A feature on Zoom, so if you've got any questions, just pop them in there and I'll read them out at the end. I'm Lisa Ravenscroft. I'm the Communications Manager at ProtectED, and I'm very pleased to welcome today's speakers. So we've got Vivi Friedgut, who's the CEO and founder of Blackbullion, a provider of digital and financial education. So hello, Vivi. And Megan Pengelly, who's the Criminal Justice and Development Manager at Gamcare, the leading national provider of free information, advice and support for anyone affected with problem gambling. So I'll be discussing with Vivi and Megan the practices and structures that they have developed to support student resilience in relation to finance and gambling problems. They will also discuss some of the problems that COVID-19 crisis has added to those which they would normally encounter, and their thoughts obviously on the future university student support, because obviously there's been a lot of changes in that at the moment. So Vivi and Megan, welcome, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
So first question we've got, just so we can hear a bit more about both of you, is can you tell us a little bit more about your organisations and how you support students? Vivi, can we come to you first, please?
Sure. So first of all, thank you very much for having me. Always a pleasure. So Blackbullion is a financial education company. We are digital first. So everything that we do is online for students. And really our goal is to help young people, not just university students anymore, but to help students across the country and across the world. We operate in Australia, New Zealand and South Africa as well, to get kind of smarter about their money. We don't train our young people about money. We let them go to university and hand them these huge amounts of cash, and then we're surprised when they don't know how to use it kind of to the best effect in order to help them best on campus. So we work with universities right across the country in helping students to develop those really core fundamental skills to help them successfully transition into university, through university, and then out of university, while hopefully not running out of money. So that's what we do.
Okay, Megan, can we go to you next?
Sure. Thanks very much for having us. To echo what Vivi said, so Gamcare are the leading provider of treatment, support and education around problem gambling. So for those who kind of have no idea what I'm talking about with problem gambling still, essentially we define that as detrimental impact on social life, psychological health, or finances as a result of gambling behaviour, and that can be for an individual or it could be for their friends and family as well as a result of somebody else's gambling. So we've been around for about 20 years supporting problem gamblers and their families in all different kinds of ways. Primarily our offer is that we operate the National Gambling Helpline. We take about 40,000 calls and chats on that a year, speaking to people day in, day out about their experience and trying to signpost them into support. And then we also run a free offer of treatment and support nationwide. We see about 10,000 people a year in that as well. And to support that, we have a number of different offers around education as well. The primary thing that we have for students is obviously all of those core services, but we also run quite an extensive program of training organisations who can identify where there might be a young person, particularly a student, experiencing harm as a result of gambling. And that's all offered free of charge to many organisations. So that's a little bit about what we do.
Thanks both, that's really interesting. So second question, have you noticed a shift in the type of financial and gambling problems students are dealing with due to COVID lockdown?
So I can talk about the finances and then really for Megan to talk much more.
We just do it the same way each time if you go.
Yeah,
is that all right?
much more authoritatively on the gambling side of it. What we have noticed during lockdown, and it really happened almost immediately, was this extra pressure on students' finances, mostly because of housing. So students were obviously still, you know, paying their rent and locked into contracts that caused a lot of kind of chaos on top of uncertainty. I mean, everyone remembers what March and April were like, although we'll spend the rest of our lives trying to forget. But so there was really a lot of kind of initial chaos that happened without a lot of guidance, mostly because nobody really knew. So we were all operating completely in the dark. And so students were having to find, you know, emergency travel home to go into lockdown. And of course, you've got estranged students who were really in very, very troubling and continue to be in very difficult situations. What we saw really interestingly was an increase in online trading. And again, like Megan will talk on the gambling side, but because the stock market was doing what the stock market was doing, we actually heard from a lot of the student money advisors on campuses who we speak to all the time, that a lot of students were suddenly day trading and, you know, cryptocurrencies and US stocks. And it was a really interesting surprise to us, because this has never really been a thing for students. But because of the market fluctuations, because it's become so easy to day trade and even take out leverage, which is horrific, and should really be criminalized here for people who don't know what they're doing. We saw a lot of students getting into kind of catastrophic financial difficulties at a time when they were already in trouble. And because there was this uncertainty emotionally for students, and because reaching out to staff was more difficult, it was kind of, I think, this perfect storm of trouble, where people had all of this time, there was all of this uncertainty, there was issues with money, and all of a sudden there were all of these online facilities for them to spend their money in ways that were not necessarily positive. So the kind of short answer is yes, we absolutely saw financial difficulties and enhanced financial difficulties. And a lot of universities were already starting to close up some of their emergency fund pots, because under normal circumstances, universities would not be providing much emergency funding throughout the summer. So there was extra burden on pots of money, and universities were really, it was a superhuman effort what was happening on campuses to try and support students. But of course, that means students have to reach out for help, and that isn't always what happens. So yeah, the short answer is it was a perfect storm, and we saw kind of chaos, which continues to happen. We haven't yet seen the end of that, I don't believe. But Megan obviously will have a much better insight into the gambling side of it.
Yeah, well, yeah, to echo a lot of what Vivi said, one of the main things that we noticed in terms of how people's gambling behaviour changed is that different types of activities were undertaken. So obviously land-based gambling, which normally falls into kind of betting shops, bookmakers, casinos, and there's other stuff such as bingo and arcades as well. All of that has been closed down. Some is starting to reopen now. So a lot of people who might have gambled at those land-based places transferred to online. There's always a risk whenever you start a new type of gambling and things like that, in terms of your information level, your safety level, whether you've got the appropriate checks in place as regards kind of your limits and things like that, which many operators do enable people to use those tools. There is some interesting research and quite surprising research, maybe similar to what you're saying, Vivi, about kind of people in maybe unusual things, such as the stock market. So there's some interim research from the University of Glasgow, which is suggesting that there's a 3,000% uptake in betting on esports. So esports is essentially like virtual Olympics, for those who might not know what it is. It's a growing trend in the past decade or so. But yeah, the suggestion from the University of Glasgow is that there's been a 3,000% uptake in betting on esports just during lockdown. And that's a much longer piece of research, because, you know, as with the support that we'll give people, it's not just the short-term changes in behaviour, but there'll be long-term changes in behaviour as well. And obviously, just to say that the relationship between problem gambling behaviour and financial behaviour is intrinsically linked. People, you know, might become more conservative with their money at this time, but there is also reasons why, if you're a person experiencing a number of different risk factors, like low mood, like worried about future funds, you might be more prone to problem gambling. So yeah, some short-term kind of interesting findings, but we're also looking forward to the future and see what the long-term impact on behaviour will be as well.
Thanks, both. That's really interesting, actually. And I hadn't really thought about places closing, like, you know, bingo halls and, you know, I suppose little slot machines and things. So yeah, that's quite interesting. So next question, has COVID changed any of your business practices or made you relook at the services you offer to students in universities?
So from Blackbullion side, we're a digital first company, so everything we do is digital anyway. So what COVID, there were really two things that COVID did. The first was that it raised the importance of having digital support for students, and it's no criticism on the university sector. A lot of support is given face-to-face, and we all know that face-to-face support is obviously the most powerful because you can extract the things that you need to extract in a face-to-face meeting in a way that you can't do online. But because what we do is a lot of preemptive education to try and help people to avoid getting into the trouble in the first place, being where they are on their mobile 24/7 means that what we do is highly impactful because students are able to rewatch things that they don't understand. Students won't very few people put their hand up and say, I don't understand something. Whereas if you're watching it online, you can watch it over and over again until you do understand it. It removes kind of the shame. And I hate that word, but it removes the shame of saying, I don't know. So a lot of that, what we saw was universities actually making this giant leap in terms of digital support with the kind of services that we offer, which is obviously good for us, but we also consider that really good for students, because if they do have all of this extra time on their hands, we would much prefer that they were learning and kind of sorting out some of these core skills than spending that time doing other things. But the really interesting part for us is that we, at the end of last year, at the start of December 2019, I can't even remember what year we're in anymore. At the end of 2019, we released a new funding solution, which is a back office solution to streamline the process of assessment for hardship funding. Universities give out a lot of money in hardship, and a lot of that was being done in very old school kind of Excel spreadsheets methodology. And what that meant was that things were taking a very long time. It was taking up to 4 weeks, for example, to give emergency hardship funding, because the process was very laborious and because it's never been a top priority for, IT departments to kind of resolve this problem. So again, it's no criticism on universities, but with this heightened focus on tech, this became a really core issue for universities. If a student couldn't come in and hand in a pile of documents, how could they apply for funding? And so we had actually released this at the end of 2019. And we had half a dozen clients that kind of came on board in the early stages. And what they said was, which was really interesting to us, was when they shut down offices and went home, somebody described it as, all I did was open my laptop and do my work exactly as I had done it in the office, because it was all digital. And then there were other people saying, we have like cash for emergency funding, which is locked in the safe in the office. And so there was this real kind of tale of two services. And so for us, in a way, what this has done is it's demonstrated what we could never have demonstrated through videos and case studies, the very real danger of not having some services online and easily accessible. So it hasn't been a shift for us because we were doing it anyway, but it has certainly accelerated the understanding by people of what we had hoped they would see and what the value that we hoped we could add to them. That's definitely been accelerated and amplified by what's happening. And obviously it's not an ideal scenario. This is not why you want people to come around to your way of thinking. But almost half of our community now uses this funding tool because they could switch it on and the next day, like, everything just ran smoothly. So that's been probably the biggest impact for us.
Yeah, so at Gamcare, we're relatively lucky in that all of the core services that we offer already had kind of a digital element to them and a virtual alternative. So the National Gambling Helpline, which we operate, was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we operate that in two ways. So we take phone calls and then we also do web chat as well. So exactly the same experience, whichever medium you use. What we have noticed is that in COVID, many more people are using the web chat service rather than the phone calls. One reason we think that might be happening is because, as you can imagine, with a sensitive issue, confidentiality and privacy is a big part of having those conversations. And if you're in a home, you know, with other people, it's more difficult to get out, maybe find some quiet time. Web chat, where, you know, you could be doing anything on your phone or your computer, is more discreet than speaking to a helpline advisor. So we have noticed a shift to more people using that. The biggest impact has been in terms of our face-to-face treatment offer that we offer free of charge. So typically most of our clients would come for face-to-face sessions in a typical kind of therapy room. But now we're offering all of those sessions online on a Zoom format. And then we also do offer treatment in a number of different ways. So this year we launched our Computerized Cbt Offer. So you never have to kind of make a physical connection with the practitioner delivering your support. You can kind of work through it at your own time and just have periodic catch-ups over the phone with a practitioner. The popularity of that has been immense since it was launched earlier this year, and especially pertinent to COVID, and also especially pertinent to students and young people, really, especially if people aren't too sure what their relationship with gambling is. If they're not sure if they do have a problem, it might feel like a lot of a pressure to sit in a room with one person, kind of talk about that for an hour. But having resources that you can work through at your own pace has been really popular. The other thing I would say in terms of how we support professionals, at a time like this, identification of problem gambling is more important than ever. And with our training offer, that's what we support people to do. Typically, we would be delivering our training face-to-face and going through how to do the identification exercises. We have moved that to online. So if there's anybody, you know, thinking that they don't know how to identify students or the people that they work with, whether problem gambling might be an issue, just to say that our resources are there online. We can deliver all of that virtually, and now is a more important time than ever, really, to take that up. And we can kind of consult with you about what the best way to do that is, virtually or at arm's length, with the young people that you're working with.
Thanks both. That was really interesting. Okay, so next question, which I think is probably more to Vivi than it is to you, Megan, but because of lockdown, many students obviously have gone home and they're living with their parents again, and we just wondered, what impact do you think that this has had on in relation to students' financial or gambling problems, and has this situation revealed any other issues that weren't, you know, you think weren't there before?
Yeah, I think what's really important to kind of acknowledge with this entire period is that everybody is struggling. So, you know, to more or less degree. I mean, there's been a lot of press about how some parts of society are massively benefiting during this period while others are really struggling. So kind of taking a, you know, looking at kind of the more struggle side, the truth is a lot of students who've moved back home have moved back into homes where parents are financially struggling. So this is a kind of cross-family, cross-society problem. Which of course amplifies the issues. So a lot of what kind of we've been seeing is that there was this, as is always the case, it was the transition point that was difficult. Like, how do you get from campus home, and kind of how do you pay for that? How do you readjust? There are huge mental health and emotional issues, which I think we're going to see once whatever this period comes to an end. We're going to see a lot of that start to come out, and will start to bleed out in terms of the emotional distress and the emotional health issues that students, you know, would probably face, given that they've gone from independence back into the family home. And of course, there's far too many students and young people that do not have safe home environments. So there's an awful lot that's gonna kind of come out over the coming months and probably years with it. Financially, I think it's all the same. It's all the same problems. It's not having enough, being locked, you know, kind of being restricted in your movement, and therefore turning to online facilities. And so there is this kind of digitally enabled spending, which shows itself in the gambling, as Megan was saying, because you can't go into the shop, but you can do it under your covers where nobody notices. And in a way, it's that which makes it dangerous and which makes it difficult to identify and to address, because we can't see what's happening in the privacy of people's homes. And so there's a danger that in making a lot of spending very easy and making it frictionless, which is this, you know, the word in tech is, how do you get people to use your service without difficulty? In doing that, we have caused exactly the kind of financial problems that we're now seeing, because you can buy anything. We were talking before the session started about doing, you know, online ordering, and it's 2 clicks now. You don't even have to put in your credit card because you can just go through PayPal. So you don't think about the money because the process is now 10 seconds long, and there's no, your brain doesn't have that moment to catch up with your spending. So your impulse and your brain are completely kind of disassociated now. And being home and being bored / uncomfortable / not where you want to be / in a dangerous environment, you know, whatever, just means that you're more likely to seek solace in one of these things, and inevitably that means money. So it's the same problems that it always is, but it's just compounded and amplified in a way that none of us were really prepared for, because how do you prepare for a pandemic? So I think we're not going to see the outcome of this for months, but when it hits, it's going to hit like a tornado. And that's what worries me, is I don't think we're ready for that. So yeah, that's kind of, it's not a hopelessness story, but we have to get on top of this now before it actually comes out. It's a challenge to the sector, really.
Definitely. Megan, did you have anything to add to that one?
Yeah, just to say that we really expect the same as what Vivi has indicated, which is that we, you know, as a lot of students are going home, it does compound a number of issues. And the biggest risk, and why we do specific work around kind of transitional age groups, is because it is that moment of transition when you're most vulnerable. If your finances change one way or the other, and that is when you're most vulnerable to experiencing a change in your gambling behaviour. And when problems can occur, and also you can be impacted by somebody else's problems as well. So yeah, as Vivi said, you know, it's a perfect storm really of different issues that put people at risk of problem gambling. But only time will tell, I think, the longer term impact. I think we're also looking ahead to, in terms of whether students return in a virtual format, whether they return in a face-to-face format. A lot of the kind of gatekeepers of this issue from our point of view at universities are people who are wellbeing officers, grant makers, who are generally meeting face to face. So we're quite interested in, if the identification isn't happening in those face to face meetings, how can that identification still be done if students aren't returning in a physical format? You know, could potentially be a few years impact on that. So thinking ahead to that as well.
Okay, great. Thanks for that insight again. So next question, why do you think that students are more prone to developing problem gambling and financial behaviours?
Megan,
I'm happy to go first on this one. Yeah, so one of the reasons that we kind of do specific work in this area, I guess, as I've kind of hinted at there, typically what happens is when you're 18, that's the first time you've gained any independence, and you gain quite a significant chunk of money if you go down the student loans route. Now, in terms of gambling, with all the kind of offers and things like that that typically, you know, communicate that it might be quite a safe activity, it might be quite a fun activity, that combined with the finance that you have, and then also combined with the fact that for many gambling activities, 18 is the first time that it is legal to participate in any of those things. So you get kind of an eruption of a number of different factors that might incline somebody to change their gambling behaviour. At a time when you're going through a lot of other issues as well, you know, being away from home for the first time, new friends, thinking about your life as an independent person. And that creates an incredibly vulnerable period of time. There's been quite a lot of research done into why young people might be more at risk. But it's really interesting. So typically what happens is that young people might gamble for the first time, and there might be a higher prevalence of issues within that. In the past 10 years or so, we've definitely seen the age of people that contact our service for support has come down in age, and that might be slightly to do with the digitalisation of gambling, but also to do with different financial circumstances as years go on. It's not necessarily to say that if you start gambling and you run into issues as a person in a kind of transitional age group, as students typically would be, it's not to say that there will be issues for the kind of entirety of your journey into adulthood, or when you know have more stable circumstances, but that young people do experience a very particular set of circumstances that puts them at risk. And what's really important is A, that they're identified during that period, and B, really receive appropriate support. So we have done quite a lot of work, particularly out of our Leeds service. We've piloted a project of kind of designing resources specifically for young people, where they feel represented in the language and the communication. And a large part of that, there's been some new evidence highlighted by Gamble Aware, which is a big organisation working on this issue, looking at who is missed out of, who doesn't come for support essentially. And young adults are a big part of that group, unfortunately. And the suggestion is that the more people can be represented in these communications, the more that they will use services. So that's what we try to do as much as possible. And of course, work with the people who are working with young adults already.
Thanks, Megan. Do you have anything to add to that, Vivi?
No, I mean, I would echo everything that Megan's just said. I think that students, sort of on the general money side, the idea that there is easy money is an idea that just won't die, which I don't. It baffles me all the time. If there was an easy way to make money, we'd all be rich. Like, you know, it's kind of that idea. But there are also a lot of student-focused websites. Some of them claim to be student finance facing websites that have entire sections about matched betting, about how easy it is, about how risk-free it is. I don't have a lot of nice things to say about companies that do things like that when they purport to be about finance for students. But again, I think it's about that transition point from secondary school into tertiary education, whether it's university or whether it's college or whether it's into the workplace. This idea that freedom is a moment as opposed to a journey, I think is a dangerous message. It's not that one day you're a kid and the next day you're an adult. It's a journey towards that kind of level of personal responsibility and also all of the kind of stuff that comes with that. And so the idea that we give students, as Megan said, this huge chunk of money, but we don't tell them what to do with it or how to manage it or how to budget is ridiculous. There's really no words for it. None of us budget 3 months at a time, but we expect students to, which is very peculiar to me. And again, I think it's bad. Like there's no kind words for how that's being handled. If there's one thing we could do to help students, it's pay them monthly, right? Like help them to budget the way that the rest of us budget. The transition point has not been particularly well done up until now. Every university operates slightly differently. There's no kind of holistic messaging around it. There is still a lot of confusion about, you know, how do overdrafts work? We get a lot of calls from students who don't understand that overdrafts are debt. They just don't get that. They think it's just free money. We had a student last year who called and said, why hasn't my overdraft reset? It's like, what do you mean reset? Like, well, I get £1,500 overdrafts. It's like, well, did you spend it? It goes, yes, but it's a new year. It's like, no, that's not how this works. So we released a new program, which is a free program called Money Ready for Uni, because we're not terribly creative at naming things. And the whole idea is to really give people, you know, the tools and the knowledge that they need to be money ready for university, which is a particular kind of learning. And it's we make it freely available. So it's just out there. So the students understand that money, they should be just as anxious about how to get their money sorted as how they're going to make friends, where they're going to live. All of these things tie in together. And we need to be presenting a more holistic journey for students into university, because if you land prepared, you are more likely to have a positive trajectory through education. Whereas if you land with debt, or you land with with gambling debt, or you land with some of these issues, if they're not addressed and if they're not identified, then you will drop out within 6 months or within 12 months. And what a terrible shame that is. So I think, again, it's incumbent on everyone in the sector to start to think about how we prepare students slightly better, rather than dropping them kind of into pots of money and expecting them to not blow it on ASOS. ASOS know better than students do when their loan drops. That's why they give them 20% discounts on that day. So we're kind of fighting against this view of how money operates, and we kind of almost have to do better to help these students as a community.
That's really interesting, actually. And Yeah, just giving them all their money at once is probably not the best solution at all, because in the real world that wouldn't happen at all, because you get your wages, or per month. And to be honest, a lot of adults that I know, at the end of each month, they're not very good at budgeting either. They're down to pence. So
our single most popular piece of learning during lockdown, and we've probably had double the amount of learning that we normally would under these conditions, is around budgeting, because it is the single skill that if you have it, everything else gets easier. And that's as true for adults as it is for students. Not that those two groups are not the same thing.
No,
but if there's one thing that we could do, it's change how students receive their money.
I think that is actually
it would be the single most powerful thing we could do to help students with their finances, I believe.
Definitely. Moving on to our next question. So the ProtectED Code of Practice looks at issues impacting students' wellbeing and mental health. How do you think that universities might better encourage student financial resilience and deal with related problems such as gambling? So obviously we've covered some of that in the previous question about budgeting, but is there anything to add to that one?
I guess I would like to do a bit of a shout out to student services across the country. To be honest, I think that it has been a superhuman effort. I mean, we've heard of universities where staff have donated their parking money into a fund so that students can access more money. Like, we've just heard of the most phenomenal behavior and attitude and outreach on behalf of student services across the country. So I really massively salute the incredible work that they've been doing. We have found that viewing students in a very holistic way in terms of student services and trying to put all of these things into a single place in order to, as Megan was saying, identifying is kind of almost at the core of everything. But being able to tie all of the services together also means it's more powerful, because they each kind of build on each other. So I guess from our side, it's a case of kind of keep doing what you're doing. I feel that it's not student services where sometimes the blocker is. It's about getting buy-in from other departments and sometimes from academic staff into how crucial and critical the role is of student services. University life has changed. Students' expectations of university has changed. Students want to be looked after. There is more of a loco parentis kind of attitude than there was when I was studying, and that's only 15 years ago, although I'm an old lady now apparently. But the attitude that students have towards being more of a consumer of education has sat very uncomfortably with the sector for the last 5 or 6 years since we've kind of been doing what we do. But I think that is gradually changing. And so viewing students as a more holistic individual who needs mental health support and gambling support and financial support, and to get the academics and to look after their mental health and to look after them as far as making friends and accommodate, all of that is now becoming more of a kind of single point of contact on campus, which I think is great. I think that we also have to encourage students to think of themselves as more independent adults. And there is a part of that sits very uncomfortably with me, that universities have to act in a loco parentis role, because at the end of the day, 18, 19, 20 is not kids anymore. So it's a tightrope. It's a tightrope. But I think a lot of campuses, most campuses that we speak with, seem to be walking that tightrope kind of basically quite well. So I think there's obviously responsibility on all sides, as is always the case.
Megan, do you have anything to add to this one?
Yeah, from our point of view, we see any member of staff who's having an interaction with young people, with students, as a key kind of gatekeeper of this issue, and really part of the bigger project to protect people from harm because of problem gambling. And they play a really, really important role. So in all our work, unfortunately, the case is that problem gambling is not high enough up the agenda of many different industries, and that goes right through the spectrum of different cohorts of people. A lot of our work is concerned with raising awareness within staff groups about this issue, and trying to gain the same parity as kind of alcohol misuse issues or substance misuse issues, but also walking that kind of line between not lumping it in with those two other issues. Gambling has its own particular issues attached to it. It requires a fairly specific approach. But at the moment, our kind of main emphasis is on speaking to people who have those frontline roles or have organisational influence. The key thing that we're really keen on is just identifying where people are experiencing harm. And that's not a kind of overbaked process. We have different tools to kind of integrate into different formats depending on your interaction with young adults. And we can facilitate that quite easily. But at the moment, we don't find that that's happening very much. Where it is happening, it's having a tremendous impact. Where harm can be identified, there's very rigorous pathways set up, there's excellent services available to people. And luckily, we do find that when we make approaches to organisations and to kind of raise awareness of this issue, they're incredibly receptive. And often what we find is that, you know, they might kind of say, oh, well, you know, I'm not sure it comes up too much. But then as the conversation goes on, there'll be a number of cases where staff members might look back on individual cases and say, maybe there was a little bit of an issue with gambling there and we didn't, or we weren't able to follow up because we didn't have that information. So for us, it's about developing relationships with the support services that are out there and giving them the resources that they need to support people and signpost them into services like us. And yeah, as I was saying, we offer training to do that. And in many cases for not-for-profit organisations, we're able to do that free of charge, luckily. And we have lots of support resources online as well. So we would really encourage anybody to kind of get in touch with us about that, wherever they kind of are organisationally on this issue.
Thanks, that's really interesting again, obviously. Next question, which is the last one from us, but we have got a couple waiting from participants. So ProtectED was established to raise standards across the HE sector, and I just wonder if you've got any examples of particularly good or problematic practices that you could share with us, obviously without naming the university, of course. So is there anything that you've witnessed from particular universities or organisations, obviously you mentioned that for Vivi, that you think obviously is detrimental?
Megan, you got anything?
we don't have anything that we have thought is particularly detrimental. I guess the biggest impact is where there isn't anything happening really. So it's not kind of an intentional mispractice or anything like that. But unfortunately, it's where the awareness hasn't been raised. And the best practice, we would say, is places that really take up these and integrate them into typical processes. So with some issues, and you know, there is I don't want to call it a barrage because that seems negative, but there are a huge number of health and social issues that all need to have their agenda raised, and gambling is part of that. And so what we find is that it can kind of get lost in translation sometimes if you don't have a rigorous process set up. So what we try to do as much as possible, and we've seen some great examples of this with our pilot in Leeds, is organisations integrating it into typical processes. So, you know, it could be if somebody is applying for a hardship grant, integrating that screening process into that form that they're filling out, integrating it into welfare sign-ups and things like that. There's lots of different ways it can be done, and it's, you know, a fairly simple process, but the impact that it will make to integrate those processes is tremendous. And we're really happy that a number of universities and other organisations have taken it up, and really keen to do that as much as possible.
Vivi, do you have anything to add to that one?
I would kind of echo that. Thankfully, there's no university doing anything that I can think like, oh, they need to be scolded. Like, I don't think there's kind of any of that. Again, I think everyone is doing the very best that they can within the resources. The question is always whether there is sufficient resource for them to execute on what they want to execute on. But that's rarely on student services. That is usually coming from up high. In terms of like the positive stuff, Blackbullion is often integrated, exactly as Megan said, throughout hardship processes. Usually anything to do with money, students receiving money in our community universities. There is an element of Blackbullion which is made effectively compulsory as a part of it. So if a student is receiving a large grant, then they usually have to do the budgeting kind of lesson in our platform before they receive that money, which is part of the reason we built out this funding tool, so it automates the whole process. and we have found, and the feedback that we've had from universities is that, especially with hardship funding and emergency funding, that they've seen up to a 50% reduction in students who are repeat kind of frequent flyers, I believe is how some people refer to them, students who come term after term asking for emergency funding. And that's not just good for the university in terms of how they deploy funds, but it's better for the student, because declaring that you have a financial emergency is actually mentally quite challenging for a lot of students. And so reducing the need for students to do that is very positive for them. There is a sense of accomplishment and of pride when you don't have to ask for help, which, you know, we all experience as, you know, just people. So there's a lot of very good practices that we've seen. I think what we've done, which is quite unusual with a lot of companies that we've met, is we're very much led by our community. A lot of what we do comes from the community's suggestions. We have a advisory board that meets every quarter, and people will be like, oh, we've seen that this has happened, and then we'll go back and think of ways in which we can use our platform to support that issue, and then it becomes kind of nationally integrated. So we've been really proud of our community for helping us drive a product which they are finding to be really useful and that students are finding really useful. So unfortunately, I got nothing but praise. I don't have any major criticisms. If there was anybody that I would be kind of saying naughty, it's at the level where finances are being distributed to the funding departments and to student services, where perhaps there is not enough. And we've had, and I'll shut up after this, but we've had a few new partners that have joined us in the last few months. And when we've said to them, you know, really excited to have you on board, why did you decide to bring us on board? They were like, we've been pushing for budget for this for 3 years, but because of coronavirus, we've now had sign off. And I think that is where the issue lies, not in terms of us. If it's happening in terms of Blackbullion, it's probably happening across a wide range of services. So it is really about how can student services be given what they need in order to support students. And it's not always money, but often it is. But I've got nobody that I'm wagging my finger at. They're all doing great work in very difficult conditions.
That's encouraging that there's no one to scold. Excellent, thank you for both much for that. So we'll just move on to the questions from the people who have joined us. So first one from Jaleesa. So she's asking, how can student-facing staff like wellbeing officers encourage a student that might not think that they have issues to look at their gambling / spending behaviours? So both of you again, I think.
Yeah, so a lot of the places where we kind of suggest that is integrated is, as I kind of talked about, those kind of more neutral processes where somebody might be being onboarded to a service or going through a certain process. So there, even if you don't kind of have any suspicions, as it were, about somebody being impacted by problem gambling, it normalises those questions. I always think of it a little bit like when you go to the GP for a checkup, they ask everybody, how many cigarettes do you smoke a week, and how much alcohol units do you drink a week, or whatever. So that kind of naturalisation and, you know, destigmatising the process is great. But we appreciate that there are some circumstances where you know, your suspicions might be raised. Generally, what we suggest is kind of raising it in a neutral way. So one of the resources that we have is we have a screening tool, which is just 4 simple pieces of information that you can kind of extract from somebody to get a better impression of where they might sit on the problem gambling scale. And we have some really nice resources that make it kind of easier to integrate into a natural conversation. So lots of things out there. What we do suggest is that, because, as I said, gambling is a very specific issue, and as with anything that is you know, sensitive like this, it's important that it's done in a really good way. The best way to take up those resources is to take up some of our free training. So if you're interested in that, please do get in touch with myself. I hope that you're able to distribute our email address, Lisa, afterwards, because we're more than happy to do that, and realise that now is an integral time to do that, more important than ever. Yeah, and sorry, the other thing I would just say with that is also to encourage young adults to find out more for themselves. There are lots of really good online resources. Our website, gamcare.org.uk, has a really good resource, which is a self-assessment tool. So you can use that. You don't have to kind of be prescriptive about that, but you could suggest that as a resource. We also have printed materials that are really good to kind of leave out in neutral spaces. In Leeds, we've been distributing them in a lot of student unions, and we've found that the uptake has been really good. So it's not always necessarily about kind of an intervention. It can also just be about making that information accessible on your website, in your environments, things like that.
Great, thanks. Vivi, have you got anything to add about spending behaviours? I suppose if it was a student who the friends thought maybe needed to not spend.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because money is the last great taboo, and people don't sit around and talk about their debt. When people do that, we can shut up shop because we will have achieved our job. And I often joke with the team that our goal is to do for money what Sex and the City did for sex, right? It completely mystified the whole thing. It meant that you could sit with your friends and go, oh my God, like I've got this terrible credit card debt. I don't know what to do. And kind of when we've done that, we'll know we've done our job. One of the reasons that we do what we do is that the number one thing people wish they'd learned younger was about money. It's often the top thing is to understand money, then it's about budgeting, then it's about how pensions work. Like the top 5 things out of the top 10 things you wish you'd learned were all financial. And it's because we know that the younger you start, the better off you are going to be from a financial point of view, which often impacts on your mental health. It impacts on your gambling. It impacts on your physical health. It impacts on your academic achievement. Money kind of underpins everything. So there are 2 things really from our side that we see on our campuses. The one is the more kind of light touch, exactly what Megan is saying. Like if people know that, people need to know the service is there. There's only so much that external companies can do in order to enable students to know that the service is available. So there is an element of kind of signposting, websites, everything that Megan's just said. What we are finding is that a number of our universities, I think there are 4 at the moment, who are going through an internal process to actually make learning a compulsory, almost parallel curriculum to what they're doing. So I am a little bit more on that side of the fence of making it prescriptive, because unfortunately some of the things that are most powerful in your life are the things that you don't want to do, but you wish you had. And so when we've had some universities who said, oh, we don't want to make this compulsory for emergency funding, for example, for hardship funding, it's like, that's okay, but actually you're doing your students an enormous disservice, because they will know that this is good for them to do later. Our lessons are quick, they're interactive, they're video, like they're animated, like it's all very nice and easy. But I feel that we can only be doing an entire generation of students a service if we force them to learn some of these things while they're at university. There's a safety net. So if you run out of money, somebody will catch you. That is not true in the real world. We've had, graduates we've heard from graduate employers who've been like, we don't understand these students. They come in and then they want an advance on their salary because they're used to having a safety net. And actually, we need to much better educate students about money before they graduate, because there's no safety net out there. Look at what's happening in the United States right now, where 40% of people don't know how they're making next month's rent payments. Like that is a catastrophic societal issue. That's not just catastrophic for the person and the family, it's catastrophic for the entire nation. And we are not that far behind. And so learning how to budget, learning how to use your money effectively, learning how to have an emergency fund, if you can learn those things while there is a safety net, you will graduate significantly in a more powerful position. So I'm very much of the make it compulsory, like learn how to budget in your first year, understand debt in your first year, understand pensions in your 3rd year as you're about to graduate. How do you read a pay slip? Like all of these things are critical life skills. Universities are the perfect time to learn. So I'm kind of the more prescriptive side of it. But the first thing is definitely just signposting. The main criticism we get from students is, why didn't I know about this earlier? It's like, I don't know, your campus invested in this 2 years ago. So and we work very closely with the universities to advertise our services to students, but budgeting is not seen as a sexy subject. People don't reach out for it, but once they get it, they change their life. So it's a challenge, but we feel it's a challenge that is worth tackling.
So you both think then, obviously, like bringing it to students' attention more, so from the officers would encourage the students obviously to take up the services more, I suppose. Yeah. Next question then, from Caroline. Do students self-refer for support for problem gambling or financial issues, do you find, or do other students, university staff, parents, etc., also sometimes refer students experiencing difficulties? And what issues does this raise for the university support services?
So just to answer from Gamcare's perspective, both routes are great, self-referral or referral from an organisation such as Student Services. At the moment, we don't receive many referrals from Student Services, and we're really trying to get that on the rise. One reason is that self-referral is brilliant. It obviously shows somebody has a lot of self-awareness. It shows somebody has a lot of motivation to change their behaviour. If that can, be supported by a service where they might come back repeatedly, it can ensure that that person is more likely to complete a journey to change their behaviour. So we try to encourage that as much as possible. But yeah, both is possible, both is great. But as much as possible, we believe it, it kind of takes a village to support somebody experiencing difficulties. So as many kind of different touch points as possible to be involved in that journey is brilliant.
Vivi?
Yeah, I was just checking if I was muted. So much the same. I mean, our service is, if you just go to blackbullion.com, you could just log in. So there's less of a referral system that happens. It's more about just knowing where to go. But we get all kinds of students coming in at all times of day. Sometimes they're coming in because they have to. Sometimes they're coming in because they want to. We see quite different kinds of students who use our platform. So we've got the students who are coming in probably, like, we make assumptions that they're probably in some sort of distress. It's 2 o'clock in the morning and they're learning about debt. Usually those are not people who are sleeping well about their money. So we kind of infer from that certain kind of proxy sort of data. But then we have a lot of students who use our platform to learn about sustainable investments and pensions and mortgages and like more what we would consider more aspirational financial kind of elements. So we definitely see both kinds of students coming in. It's a really interesting time because also people are worried about kind of the recession that we're starting to see the start of. A lot of third-year students are very worried about what happens next with jobs and want to explore potential postgraduate studies kind of as what do we call it, like a safe haven during recessions. And so we have a lot of people who are now looking at our content around how to fund postgraduate studies. So we get all sorts of different kinds of students who are using us for all kinds of different reasons, which from our side is great because, again, money impacts on everybody. Unless you're Jeff Bezos's kids, who today hit $200 billion in net worth, chances are, you can always benefit from learning more. So, we get students who come in from all sorts of different places.
Great. So we'll just go on to our last question, which is probably timed quite well. Universities will be struggling financially for the rest of this year and 2021 due to COVID-19. Do you think that there's a risk that support for students will suffer? If so, what can be done to ensure that student support continues to be provided? Either?
Yeah, I guess just to say that absolutely we would anticipate that a lot of services will be stretched to the absolute limit, and it's not an easy time to work in student services now more than ever. I think what we would say is that there are, across the health and social care spectrum, there is a lot of brilliant free resources and services out there who proactively kind of want to get involved in the work that you're doing with students, ourselves included. I don't just want to, kind of flog our stuff, but I know there are lots and lots of organisations such as Adaction, such as Crisis, things like that, that really want to get involved with the services in order to help the people that you are already supporting. And a lot of those services are free, such as ours. So yeah, we completely appreciate that. I imagine there will be a lot of kind of stretching in student support services. All of the things that we offer, generally speaking, are free where possible. The large majority of universities that we've trained, that's been free. And we have plenty of free resources to support as well. So please do get in touch with us if there's anything that we can do, and do visit gamcare.org.uk And yeah, as much as we can, we offer things that are free at the point of service.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're definitely going to see stretching, like we're going to see everywhere. I'm going to wave a little bit of my kind of ed tech flag here. I'm a member of the kind of education technology group here in the UK. And I think one of the things that can be considered in terms of helping with that stretching is what things you can automate and get off people's plates in order to stretch the services where they need to be stretched. So kind of our funding tool, one of the main reasons that universities were excited about it is it removes the administration nightmare of chasing people for documents. Like, it is absurd in 2020 that people are sending 20 emails in order to get a bank statement. Like, it's just not sensible. It's not good use of time. So our system fully automates it. So the student can upload, and if they haven't uploaded, they get an automatic notification. That takes hours and hours and hours. It returns hours and hours and hours to student services, who can then use that time more efficiently. So there are services that can reduce the time pressure, which I think is actually the biggest issue. So even if teams remain exactly the same size as they are, and that there's a question around whether that's going to be true, being able to buy back an extra, 5 or 6 or 10 days of time because you are automating certain services, I think will make a huge difference. There is going to be financial pressure because there are going to be more students who are going to need financial support. And if pots are not increased, which is the most likely outcome at this point, then that will add a financial pressure. One of the things that we've done with this tool is we've added in an easy way of searching for scholarships and bursaries that are available out there in the market, so that students can find other pots of money that are not just student services. So by making it easy for them to find that, it's my favorite example, if your mother or father are a greengrocer, there is cash available for you, which is like the funniest scholarship out there. But there are all these pots of money. It's hundreds of millions of pounds worth of money. It's about 600 million pounds worth of money that is out there available in scholarships and bursaries to undergraduates and postgraduate students. And so making it easy for students to apply for that means that actually student services budgets might be more compacted, but actually there is all this money out there, and how do we help students to find that money, apply for that money in a way that helps them? So it is possible that this next period won't be catastrophic for student services. There's no reason why it should be, but it is going to add pressure. And so I would suggest, in my very humble opinion, that you look at the kind of services that could add capacity at times. And some of it is about using, services where you can almost like refer people, and some of it is about freeing up your own time so that you can use that time in a more efficient way. We'd much rather student services did what they want to do, which is look after students, than be chasing down paperwork. Like, in 2020, it's ridiculous that that's how things are operating, and that's what's happening on 120 campuses in the country. Is Excel spreadsheets and calculators. Like, that's just nuts. So yes, but it's going to be a difficult time, and like Megan, we're here to support in any way that we can. You guys are superhuman, genuinely.
Thanks both. Yeah, it is going to be a hard time for a lot of university services, I think, coming up, especially with all the changes that will be happening within the university itself. So thanks everyone for your questions and for attending this ProtectED reflection session. And thanks obviously to Vivi and Megan for being with us this morning and sharing your knowledge and experience. We'll be publishing the video of this event over the next few days, and we'll also be including details of our next ProtectED Reflections event on the 24th of September. So make sure you save that date. And in the meantime, thanks again for joining us, everybody. Stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event.